To back or not to back?
That is the question.
So I'm very excited. Today, we've got an interview with Frank West. And you're from Bristol, which is quite apt, right?
It is, yeah. It's where all the pirates came from. So down in the south of England.
Exactly. So for all of the people who don't know, Bristol is the West Country, you see, and he's from the West, so it's real, authentic English. The reason me and Frank are talking today is because he's got a new Kickstarter coming out soon called The City of Kings. And rather than me mangle what it's about, give us a brief overview of what the game is.
So The City of Kings is a 1 to 4 player cooperative fantasy adventure game where you're going to take a hero, you're going to customize it, choosing from 90 different stats and 12 different skills, kind of defining your own role, and then you're going to explore across a modular board, and you're going to encounter survivors that give you quests and missions you need to do, and you're going to encounter creatures which are big beasts, and they're procedurally generated, so each creature is going to be tougher, harder, and different to the last one you encounter. There's effectively endless different types of creatures, and it's a kind of tactical combat game. Some people kind of typically describe it to me as this is what happens if a dungeon crawl and a Euro game have a baby. Like, it's that kind of hybrid in the middle.
And so explain to me, because there's a lot of sort of fantasy quest games you see sort of all the time, what makes City of Kings unique?
So the City of Kings is much more about kind of strategy and kind of deterministic combat and persistency. So when you play this game, you're not rolling dice. There's nothing that's going to randomly happen that's going to affect the outcome of your decisions. So the game is designed around a concept of what I refer to as kind of planned randomness. So we use randomness to generate a scenario. We use randomness to set up a board. We use randomness to create a creature and put it in front of you. But then you're always given the option to react to it. So rather than just kind of saying, I'm going to roll some dice and see what happens, if you've got an attack of 6, you're always going to do 6 damage. But does that creature die if you attack it with 6 damage? If I attack it with 6 and you attack it with 4 and someone else attacks it with 3, is that enough? And actually the combat becomes a 10-minute battle where whilst you're continuing to explore around this world and do other stuff, these creatures are kind of chasing you and setting up puzzles that you need to overcome.
So let's go back to the origin. Who are you? What's your experience with gaming? Why should people back something? Because this is your first Kickstarter, right? What is it about your sort of background and origin that makes you sort of qualified to have one?
I think it's always an interesting question. So for me, I've been enjoying games my whole life. I started off as a video gamer, like I guess many of us kind of did, and I played a lot of video games growing up, and I always wanted to create a video game. And then after spending time working on video games, it just became something that wasn't really achievable for me. And then I really got into this kind of board game world, and I really started playing board games, and the more board games I played and the more board games I experienced, the more I began to realise that actually, you can kind of do with board games what you can do with video games. Like, board games aren't just these kind of basic little engines anymore. And I played games like, Dead of Winter that introduced different difficulties and different time limits in the games. I played games like Eclipse, that had these mighty character sheets, or, your race sheet in front of you where you're learning technologies and you're customizing yourself. And all of this kind of inspired me to think, actually, that video game that I kind of wanted to make, I could now make as a board game. And I've spent a lot of time working on how do I convert these mechanics. So whilst I've not really worked on, a board game before, and it is my first board game, I've spent about 16 or 17 years working on game designs, working on game engines. My university degree, nearly 15 years ago now, depressingly, I did how do you do artificial intelligence for a browser-based video game? So, a non-real-time engine. How do you create an AI in that? And all of those things kind of now spawn into what I'm doing with this board game. So I guess it's the combination of many years of work and then, knowing that I need to put this game in front of people. So over the last 2 years, I've said to myself, I'm not releasing it till it's done. I'm going to get people to playtest it. I'm going to put it in front of people. And once I'm done with playtesting, and once I'm comfortable with it, I'm then going to ship it out to, important people, big people who know what they're doing, people who play games for a living, and say to them, give me your feedback. And it was only at the end of that process where I kind of was like, it's all good now. Like, I'm comfortable with what people are saying now. That was the point where I said, let's go to Kickstarter, we're ready. So it's not a rush game. It's not a game where I've said, I have to get this done by this date. It's a game where I've said, I want to make the best game I can make. And then, at that point, I'll work out when we're going to sell it or how we're going to actually manufacture it.
And so there's a couple of things that really stand out having looked over the game. And firstly is the monster generation. That seems like something I've never seen before. Could you explain, because you can explain this far better than I can, explain what it is, but there seems to be the possibility of thousands of different monsters that you generate when you have an encounter. They get generated instantly.
Exactly, and as you say, it's not something that I've discovered in a board game yet. The original idea actually came from Diablo, which is a video game, and in the latest version of Diablo, it has a similar concept where there's effectively a pool of abilities, and when you face creatures, they randomly get given those abilities, but any sort of combination. So in the board game sense, when you're adventuring, there are 3 bags, and each of those bags have a number of abilities. There's about 60 different abilities in total. One of the bags, is the easy bag, one of them's the medium bag, and one of them's the harder bag. And effectively, as you encounter a creature, it will say, take one ability out of the easy bag and put it onto the creature. Or if you encounter it through a quest, it might say, actually, you need to add 2 extra medium abilities. Or if you explore into a dangerous area, it might say, add 2 extra hard abilities. But these creatures generate from a set of rules to give them different abilities. So you might have one that breathes fire and teleports around the board. Or you might have one that stands still but kind of spews poison out from itself. You might have one that every turn it gets stronger and stronger, so you need to run in there and just work out how do we kill it quickly. Or you might have one that, slowly dies itself, and it's a case of not being near it when its body explodes and takes out half the board. So they all kind of create different combinations that require you to come up with strategies of where you position yourselves, how you attack this creature and how you defeat it.
So is it possible that you could never meet the same creature twice, no matter how much you play the game?
So, obviously, there's always a percentage chance that it might happen. But if you actually look at the number of possible combinations, it's effectively a 1 with 14 digits afterwards. Don't ask me which word it is for that number of numbers, but, it's crazy. We say 10 million when we kind of talk to people because, there's always going to be duplicates and stuff, but we're playing it safe when we say you're going to encounter over 10 million creatures. Like, the actual number is ridiculous. So, yeah, you might happen to pull the same 4 abilities out of the same 3 bags in one scenario, but the probability of that happening is low. And even if you do face that creature, then obviously the scenario you face it will always be different. So the creatures are, I feel confident saying they're always unique. And I've had people who have played the game 20 to 25 times, and they'll still put their hand in that bag and just put out a new ability and go, there's more! What does this mean? And then suddenly, this rushing to the book to look it up and go, oh god, this one does this, and it gets worse and worse. And it's how can there be more stuff in here? And it's designed to continuously give you that new experience of a new game and kind of finding new things.
So let's talk about the structure of how you play, because it seems to me there's 2 modes of play. There's a campaign mode, and then there's sort of single one-shots. And sort of explain those and how they feed into each other.
Okay, so the game was always designed to be played through stories. So the idea is there is a huge world behind this. As well as the game, we've been building a world for years now. So you kind of take the role of these characters in this world and you play through a series of stories. So when you open up the box, we recommend people playing them in order because obviously it makes the most sense kind of telling the story. But there's 7 stories to play, and each of them will give you a series of objectives to complete. For a single session, you play a story and it can take a couple of hours, and then, you beat the game and you move on to the next story the next time you play. But I also appreciate that not everyone always wants, a 90-minute to kind of 2-hour kind of game every time they play. So we've created a series of scenarios which are kind of shorter, like 60-minute versions of the game that take some of the features out but give you a specific task. So in a story, you might be gathering resources, you might be building structures, you might be doing quests, you might be exploring, whilst in the scenarios, there might not be any quests, or there might not be any kind of resource locations. It might be a more refined area where you've got a specific goal that you need to achieve.
And so, is there character permanence? Do the upgrades and buffs you get for your characters carry on into different aspects of the story, into different stories?
So they don't. So when I first started working on this, I had a long, hard thought, as I'm sure everyone does designing games these days, about, is this a legacy game? Am I designing a game with kind of persistency? And I decided no, because I wanted to create a game where you really can just play it over and over, and you can sit down and play it with different groups of people. And whilst some parts of the world do persist, so for example, in an early story, you might have to go and repair a shrine, and then in a later story, that shrine might start already repaired on the board. So there's kind of a little bits where you do impact what's going to happen, but I really wanted to create a game where people could sit down and customize characters, and they could say, this time I want to focus on being a long-range attacker, or I want to be a quick kind of stealthy rogue, or I want to be a healer or a mage, or I want to be a tank, or I just want to sit back and manage workers. And I didn't want to lock you into that each time you played, so you can come back, start fresh. But with that said, in some of the later stories when you're more familiar with the game, you'll be allowed to start by spending some stat points on your character. So in the first story, you kind of start, at level 0, you've got nothing, and you kind of progress your character up. But by the time you get to kind of story 4 or 5, it will say, okay, cool, we know you know the game now, so this time spend 10 stat points before you start. So you can kind of speed your way back up to where you were if you want to, or you can approach the game from a different angle.
So explain the character customization, because it seems to me that you customize your character on the fly. It's not like you play a scenario and then you get points and then you add them on. As you play, the characters change and evolve. Is that right?
Exactly. And as I said earlier, in total there are 90 stats for each character and then 12 unique skills. So the 90 stats are the same for each character, and I should say there's 9 stats, but there's 90 points that you can spend into them. And then there's 12 skills which are unique for each character. And there's 6 characters, so there's 72 skills in the game. But effectively, as you play through the game, you'll complete objectives and you'll get experience points which level you up. In this game, leveling is done as a team, so if anyone does anything that gets XP, they're put into a shared pool and everyone levels up together, so you're always kept at a similar power to each other. And then when you level up, you can increase one of your stats by 1 space. So you can choose which one of those 9 squares you want to move up one of those places. And then if you get equipment, your equipment will increase some of those stats in different ways as well. And then your skill tree is a separate thing where every so often you'll be able to get a skill disc that you can put on your character sheet, and you kind of work up like a tree following branches, and you can choose paths which will take you to different skills. So you can kind of customize which skills you want to choose for that session of the game as well.
So it's like a tech tree for the character, essentially.
Exactly. It's very much a tech tree or a skill tree. And again, if you've played any MMORPG video games, you'll be very kind of familiar with this. You start kind of in the middle and you kind of spread yourself down one path towards a certain type of skills.
Now, I know that you'll be tempted to answer this next question with the word everybody, but who would this game appeal to? What kind of gamers are going to be able to enjoy this?
So, it's one of those difficult questions because obviously for me, I don't think everybody's actually the right word because this is quite a big game. This isn't a game where you're going to take it to a pub and you're going to play it for 5 minutes with a bunch of people and it'll be done. It's an investment. It's not an investment such as like a legacy game where you're stuck with the same team, but it's an investment in the sense of it's going to take a few hours to play. So people who want a quick 5-10 minute game or kind of, a very light game, they're not going to enjoy this as much. This is a game for people who want immersion, people who want kind of really thematically heavy kind of story driven stuff, but it's also for people who want kind of strategy and tactical thinking, people who like kind of, sitting down and looking at a puzzle and trying to solve that. The cooperative side of it's interesting because a lot of people who play the game say, oh, I don't like cooperatives, or I do like cooperatives. They're one of those things. But I actually find that a lot of people who don't like cooperatives like this game because the cooperative style to it is slightly different. And I still haven't learned the best way to kind of describe it, but you're still very independent. You're just kind of stuck in this world with other people. So I don't think it's specifically people who like cooperative games, but people who just like games which are tough, which are difficult, ones which are really going to give you a problem to solve and aren't dependent on luck. If you can't sit down and look at something and go, oh, these are our 8 options and this is the best one, then you're probably not going to want to play this game. And if you just want to roll dice and hope things die, again, you're not going to want to play this. But if you want a really thinky, kind of puzzly kind of adventure game, then this is probably the right game for you.
So before we get to the sort of details and how people find you, why Kickstarter? Why did you decide to go down the Kickstarter route as opposed to the conventional going to a publisher, pitching it, that sort of thing?
So for me, the City of Kings is 2 projects. There's the game project and there's the world building project. And for me, I want to maintain ownership over the world. I want to be able to create multiple games that help tell the story of this world. And by multiple games, I'm not talking about kind of, expansions or kind of, even standalone expansions. I'm talking about different games. And I want to be able to pick and choose moments in history. So for example, in this game, you're playing as Brutius, and Brutius is one of the human kings, but he's not the king, he's the prince. He won't call himself king because his father disappeared. Whilst we have another game that's set kind of 10 years in the past, that's early prototype, but in that game you're playing the story of his father and you're understanding what happened to him and how he disappeared. And there's another game that we have kind of, and these are all ideas where you're Vesh, who's the main bad guy in this kind of series, and you're actually you're in his laboratories creating the monsters that you're now fighting in this current adventure game. And I felt that the self-publishing route allowed us to kind of keep this IP, as that's the best word for it, to actually tell these stories and make these games without having like ownership problems and complexities about who has the rights to which part of this story.
So also, I was looking through the Kickstarter preview page and explained to people, so there's a couple of pledge levels that are pretty, it's quite a lot of money, but you essentially get to design part of the game, right?
That's correct. So there's kind of 2 kind of tiers on the kind of rewards. And one of them we refer to as the world builder, and one of them refer to as the game designer. And these are both limited. There's only kind of a couple of them available. And these are really for people who, they want to kind of help create something within this world. But we're not talking kind of, like wishy-washy, like you get your name on a quest. So for the world builder, we're talking about, if you're an artist, you can actually draw a piece of art and we'll work with you to kind of make sure it fits within the theme, and it will actually be in the game. You'll have your name on it, you'll be credited for it, and we'll kind of help you build a story. We'll help you build kind of a faction within the world and kind of write that story, and it will become a part of the world. The game designer one is it's even more than that. The game designer one is sitting on Google Hangouts or Skype with me and actually working with me. I'll teach you the game. I'll walk through the mechanics. I'll have my GoPro above my head showing you the board, and we'll actually sit together and we'll design one of these scenarios that's going to be in the game. And I'll help you understand like where the balance comes in and how you kind of make these decisions. But the kind of what the players have to do and the kind of the story of that objective, you're going to get to design. And then in the final version of the game, there will be a card with your scenario, which will say it was designed by you, and you'll be given the kind of designer credits for that. And that will be in every box as well. So it's a good way, I guess, for people to kind of, help get their name out there as well if they're kind of looking to do that.
Excellent. So how do we find this project? When are you going live? And if someone wants just a bog standard base copy of the game, what should they look to be spending?
So we are going live on the 28th of March, which is a Tuesday, and it's going to be at 4 p.m. GMT, which is UK time. So I believe that's around kind of 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. in the American time zones. But apparently all the clocks changed this week, and it's completely thrown me as to where who is. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube as TCOK Game. I'm very active on Board Game Geek, so if you go to the City of Kings forum on there. You can come and ask questions, and I'll interact with you and talk to you and answer anything you want to know. And in regards to the kind of the actual game, so the base version of the game starts at £55, which is approximately $69, give or take. And then all the tiers kind of go up from there. I should say that everything within that base tier is the full game. There's nothing in the later tiers which will kind of change that. You get all the stories, you get all the scenarios, all the creatures, all the map tiles, and so on. But it is a big game. To give you kind of perspective, we're talking about a box which is the size of the Scythe box. We're talking about a box which is approximately 13 or 14 pounds in weight. So, you know, it's quite a big game and there's a lot in that box.
Excellent. Well, Frank West, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, it's been great to be here. Happy to talk to you finally after listening to your voice for all these years, Ben.
All these years.
I know, you're old now, aren't you? I went to listen to the Jamie Stagmire one where you gave him whiskey and cigars, and I don't get any of that treatment, but that was November 2015, I believe, and it was like,
I
made
know,
me feel like I've been listening to you for a long time.
I've drunk all the whiskey, that's the problem.
It's all gone.